Thank you for being here this evening. I'm Gleaves Whitney, and I'm proud to direct the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies at Grand Valley State University. And I think you're in for a real treat this evening. Another Common Ground event that also is in partnership with the Koeze Business Ethics Initiative. Michael DeWild, I'd like to recognize our partner in this event. Michael, thank you for partnering. You know, good events don't happen without great cooperation. We're lucky at Grand Valley and in this community to have some wonderful partnerships. The partnership with the Koezes and with a number of other people really make events like this soar. I want to recognize, for example, one of our Hauenstein family members, Brian Hauenstein, and Lilia, his daughter. Thank you, Brian, for being here. So we've got some wonderful folks here. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Michael DeWild, who teaches philosophy and heads up the Koeze Business Ethics Initiative here at Grand Valley. Michael, please come forward to introduce our speaker.
Wow, two applause lines in a matter of a few minutes. That has never happened to me, ever, before. It's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Helen Fisher. She is a biological anthropologist, and she will explain more. You'll learn what that is and what that means. She's a senior research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and a member of the Center for Human Evolutionary Studies in the Department of Anthropology at Rutgers University. She's also the chief scientific advisor to the internet dating site Match.com, which she'll reference more tonight and talk a little bit about how she draws on that for some of the research she does. She's here tonight not to talk about what she's often asked to talk about, which is love, sex, mating, attraction, infidelity, sex, infidelity, marriage, sex, that sort of thing. But rather to talk about the biology of leadership and some of the personality work that she's been doing. So again, my great pleasure to introduce her. Please welcome with me Dr. Helen Fisher.
You're a total scream. So I need to open this up. Travis or somebody? Okay. How do I get this so that it's up there? It is up there. Thanks, great. Well, I am delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that you're here. I and my colleagues, let's see how I studied the brain. I studied the brain in love. I and my colleagues have put over 100 people into a brain scanner and studied the brain circuitry of romantic love and deep feelings of attachment. 17 people have just become happily in love, just fallen happily in love. Another group were 15 people who had just been rejected in love. And the third were a group of people who were 17 people who were in love long term. You can, in fact, remain in love long term. We have proven that. But you got to pick the right person. Anyway, this speech isn't about love, but it starts with that because in 2005, Match.com came to me and asked me, why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? And I said, I don't know. Nobody knows. We do tend to fall in love with somebody from the same socioeconomic background, same general level of intelligence, same general level of good looks, same religious and social values. But you can walk into a room and everybody's from your background and same level of intelligence and good looks, and you don't fall in love with all of them. So I began to think to myself, maybe there's more to it. Maybe there's some basic biology, some basic chemistry that draws you naturally to one person rather than another. And you know, people will say, well, we had chemistry, or we didn't have chemistry. And I thought to myself, what does this mean? So I began to decide that what I would do is try to study the biology of personality. And that is the story of the evening. It led me from studying love, and why you are naturally drawn to one person rather than another, into the study of personality in business and a personality in leadership. So that's my tale, and it starts with this. There's two parts, basic parts of personality. There's your culture, it's all your experiences that you grew up with. And there's your biology, your temperament, your predispositions. You know, people will say, he was born that way, or it's in her blood, or I've always been that way, etc. A good 50% of who you are, scientists now think, come out of your biology. And so I began to think, okay, maybe I can take a look for any trait at all linked with your biology, and then see if I can't understand why we're naturally drawn to some people rather than others. So of course, it's the old nature-nurture issue. I'm an identical twin, so I'm very interested in your temperament. This is not to say that your culture plays a huge role in who you are. There's no question about it that it does, but the part that I tend to focus on, and will tonight, are all those traits that come out of your biology. And in fact, the newest study, this is the most important thing that's happened in my lifetime, it's epigenetics. They've now begun to show that nature and nurture are constantly in interaction with each other. What you do, how you think, what you believe can change your biology, and your biology can change, of course, how you do and what you think. So I'm basically going to focus on temperament. There's a lot of things that we have that come out of our biology. One of them is intimacy. Women tend to get intimacy from face-to-face talking. We swivel until we're face-to-face. We do what's called the anchoring gaze, and we talk. And this is intimacy to women. I think it comes from, I'm an anthropologist, I think it comes from millions of years of holding that baby in front of your face, cajoling it, reprimanding it, educating it with words. Men tend to get intimacy from sitting side by side and watching things. You know, I mean, they could watch a sports event on Sunday and then say nothing to each other all day long and find it extremely intimate. I think that comes from millions of years of sitting behind that bush trying to hit that buffalo in the head with a rock. You know, you really can't be chatting with your neighbor here if you're going to do your job. And as a result, in fact, when he looks up, he'll look away. For millions of years, men faced their enemies, they sat side by side with friends, and I think that is a form of male intimacy. The problem, of course, is this. They don't get it. Nobody gets it. He feels invaded, and she feels evaded. And I think that comes from our ancient past. And so I'm going to talk more and more about those traits that come out of your biology, what that has to do with personality, and how I think different kinds of people lead. So then, to begin, we butt heads with each other. The bottom line is to try to figure out what the other person is. So I decided what I would do is look for any trait at all linked with any biological system in the brain. That's where I started. And I thought to myself, for example, a disease like L-DOPA. It's given to Parkinson's patients. And when you take L-DOPA, creativity goes up. It's in the dopamine system, and people who are more expressive of the dopamine system tend to be more creative. People who take LSD tend to become more religious, so they say. And it's because you're driving up the serotonin in the brain. ERT, estrogen replacement, enables women to be more verbally skilled. So estrogen is now linked with verbal skills. So by going through all the literature, I began to see what personality traits are linked with different brain systems. Now, there's a whole lot of brain systems, but most of them keep the eyes blinking or the heart beating. They're not linked with personality. But there are 4 that are: dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen. Each one of these is linked with a constellation of personality traits. So I decided that what I would do is create a questionnaire. This is working with Match.com. They wanted to know why you fall for one person rather than another. And measure the traits linked with each one of these 4 brain systems, and then watch who's naturally drawn to whom. So here's it's called the Fisher Temperament Inventory. It's now been taken by 14 million people in over 40 countries. And these were the kinds of questions that I asked. I find unpredictable situations exhilarating. A high dopamine type of person really sort of likes the unpredictable. The high kind of serotonin people, they're traditional. So I put in words like should, established, proper. And I thought that that would be the kind of thing that a high serotonin person would be attracted to. Competitive, I thought would be attractive to somebody who's high on the testosterone scale. And by watching an emotional film, I often feel moved by it several hours later. People who are high estrogen ruminate. They can think over and over and over about something. So I basically had 14 questions to see to what degree you express the dopamine scale, 14 for the serotonin, 14 for the testosterone and estrogen. That was put on Match.com and Chemistry.com, a site that I started with them. And I guess about 30,000 people take this questionnaire every couple of weeks. So that way I'm able to really study these kinds of people. So I gave to a friend of mine, a geneticist from Princeton, 100,000 people to study. And what was interesting to me is no two people answered those 56 questions the same way. No two people did. That absolutely thrills me, and it thrills me because I've never met two people who were alike. Never in my life. Even identical twins are not exactly alike. But there's patterns to nature, there's patterns to culture, and there's patterns to personality. And I was able to find 4 broad styles of thinking and behaving linked with these 4 brain systems. So what I'm going to do is going to go through the 4 systems and then talk about how each style leads. And here is every single one of the questions. And just even if two people get the same score, they're not going to be the same, because one person will be very fond of these questions, these, this, and this, and somebody else will be fond of these, etc. So bottom line, no two people are alike, but there is patterns to personality. So I'm going to go through them and talk about leadership. I also have to name them. I working with a dating site, you got to name things. And so I called the person who expresses a lot of dopamine the explorer, the builder, the director, and the negotiator. Lousy terms, but I'm stuck with them now. Deloitte has adopted my questionnaire and used it to educate over 100,000 of their employees, and their terms were innovator, stabilizer, driver, and facilitator. I'm not the first person to see these 4 styles. Intuitively, mankind has known about them. Actually, Plato mentioned them, calling them the artist, the guardian, the warrior, and the philosopher king. What I've really done is found the biology to them in a new way. So those are the types. And I'm going to go through them first. And I think they're going to lead in different kinds of ways. So I just simply made up the terms: charismatic leader, authoritative leader, commanding leader, and diplomatic leader. So don't forget that we are all a combination of all of them. These aren't types. They're not cubby holes. They're brain systems. And it's interesting to know not only what you are, but what you're not. So see if we can use this biology to lead effectively, to understand the people around you. So I'm going to start with the dopamine system, the explorer, the innovator. These people are born free. This is all straight from the biological literature. It's called sensation seeking. They are sensation seekers, risk-taking, novelty-seeking. They're curious. They have the most interests. They are the most likely to go to college. They make the most money. They also lose the most money because they're so risk-taking. It's not just jumping off bridges here. There's a lot of people, say, friends of mine in New York, who love the opera and read a great deal, and et cetera. So it's mental and physical exploration. Tremendous energy. They tend to be restless, enthusiastic, and optimistic. In fact, I think that Obama is this type, along with others, but this type. And I just remember when he was first elected, the lead line in The Onion magazine, a humor magazine, the following day said, "Black man given worst job in the world." And he was optimistic about it. And indeed, I think he's still optimistic about it. And I think it's biological in his case. They tend to be independent and self-reliant, impulsive. These are the kinds that will walk into the bar and buy everybody a drink, spontaneously generous, and most important, mentally flexible and open-minded, and idea generation is linked with the dopamine system in the brain. These people create. They're very creative. And they have a tactical intelligence. I would say that most of the people you see on television are the high dopamine explorer type. They know just when to drop, just when to say the next thing. They're very quick and very tactical. On the downside, they tend to be susceptible to boredom. I'm one of them. I don't get on a plane without at least a month of work with me, just in case I'm on the tarmac for a month. I won't go crazy. Other people walk and stare out the window for 5 hours. I can't imagine what they're doing as they're doing that. They can be reckless, unreflective. They look out, not in. They tend to be manic at times, insincere, opportunistic, and unpredictable. So not everybody has all of these characteristics, but these are the characteristics that are linked generally with the dopamine system in the brain. I did a study of 178,000 men and women to see whether the words that you use are representative of your biology. It comes out of a study in the 1930s called the lexical hypothesis. The hypothesis that who you are, the words you choose, are an expression of who you really are. But nobody's ever been able to prove that it's linked to who you biologically are. And so I did it. These are the top 10 words. As I say, I got 14 million of these responses, so you can look pretty easily. I've done it with about 80,000 people. Top word they use is adventure, venturous, spontaneous, energy, new, fun, traveling, outgoing, passion, and active. All high energy dopamine words. So even if you get nothing out of this except this, if you listen to the words that people choose, they will say a whole lot to you about what their personality really is. They live in the big cities. I didn't look at Grand Rapids. They live in the big cities where the action is. Match.com is in Dallas. They're not there. They're techies. But they live in the big cities where the action is. Richard Branson is a perfect example. I've always thought that rules were made to be broken. That's a perfect line for a high dopamine person. Lang Lang, the concert pianist, flair, dazzling, charisma, bravado, daredevil, extremes, ebullient, taken by storm. John F. Kennedy certainly changes the law of life. Conformity is the jailer of freedom. And of course, Gloria Steinem, daring, energetic, etc. Very different people, very different interests, coming from entirely different backgrounds, but all the same basic temperament, that of the high dopamine, what I would call the explorer. They go for people like themselves in love, and we can certainly talk about love in the question and answer period. As Michael said, I talk a great deal about that. But anyway, in love, high dopamine people go for high dopamine people. They want to come home, and say, let's go to the opera tonight at 7:30, and they want that person to say, oh, okay, we'll stand in line, we'll see if we can get a ticket. They want somebody who's just as energetic and curious and creative and spontaneous as they are. The second, yes, this is some of the stuff that I do about leadership. If you're going to be with one of them, for God's sakes, be energetic, be optimistic, be enthusiastic, be flexible and spontaneous. Being boring is a flaw around these people. Give them new ideas, be creative, spontaneous. They like speculation. I can easily, listen to somebody's idea with no data behind it at all and be entertained by it, whereas other types really can't do that. Be daring and give them varieties and possibilities. Do not smother them with details. Do not go heavy on process. Do not give them rigid schedules and routines. Never moralize. That's not something they can do. Stay too long on a point. Be repetitive. And you're really in trouble when they attack your ideas and tune out. I'm very high on dopamine myself. And I learned my lesson one morning. I was on the Today Show. And they always put me with a psychologist. So this beautiful woman was talking to the two of us. And all of a sudden I realized I wasn't listening to her. I had tuned out. And I thought, oh my God, I hope he asks the next question to the other person, which she did. I mean, you would think that a human being could focus for 3.5 minutes. And from that day to this, if I begin to tune out, I just say, come on, Helen, get with the program here. So I think that this kind of person I would call the charismatic leader. They're going to be very good at troubleshooting, excellent in a crisis, good eye for opportunity, a wonderful sense of timing. They live in the here and now. They're risk-taking, creative, high energy, flexible, and the main thing is inspiring. They can also be quite impulsive and unpredictable. But I do think it's a leadership style, and certainly John F. Kennedy, I think, was that, and we've seen several others. The second type of broad style of thinking and behaving is linked with the serotonin system. I call these people the builder or the guardian. These are the pillars of society. They observe social norms. We actually know the part of the brain linked with observing social norms. They like the familiar. They'll go back to the same bar or the same summer house or the same year after year instead of going new places and doing new things. The academic term is harm avoidant. They're cautious. They're not scared, but they're cautious. They're calm, controlled, and modest. In fact, on Match.com, I often say to these people, don't be so modest. You've got to shimmer your feathers here. Courtship is really actually not about winning. Not about being honest. It's about winning. And so, I'm not suggesting you be dishonest, although I've watched 40,000 people lie to me regularly, actually. We know at Match and other places, what you lie about and when you lie, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all to win the mating game, which is, of course, winning life's greatest prize. So even in business and a leadership, these people can be too modest. The managerial. They like plans, routines, and schedules. And in fact, the president of Match.com happened to be in England, was some years ago, with the head of PR. And the president, Mandy Ginsburg, was very much of the explorer, the high dopamine, risk-taking, novelty-seeking type. And the head of PR was very much of the high serotonin type, builder, traditional. And they met very early in the morning, about 5:30, to go running together. And Mandy, the president, said, oh, let's run around Buckingham Palace and let's explore the streets and this and that. And the other girl said, oh, no, I have to plan my run. I have to measure how far I've gone. And they scowled at each other. And then Mandy went running around Buckingham Palace, and the other woman went to the basement and measured her run. So very different personality styles. They're orderly, definitely orderly. I have a friend who, he went into his accountant once. The accountant tend to be this type. And it was about 10 years ago, and he and his wife were talking to him annually to the accountant, and he leaned on the guy's desk. And by chance, he moved the guy's pencil sharpener. And the guy immediately moved it back. And now every single year, he goes in and he leans on the guy's desk, and every year the guy moves it back. They are orderly. Persistent, it's called sustained attention. Fact-oriented, they're concrete thinkers. And this is one of the greatest, most important moments for me in studying this stuff. A book about this had come out. It was called Why Him, Why Her. It was in 2009. And I happened to be in Seattle. And I was talking to a journalist who was going to write about the book the following morning. And so we were in a coffee shop and I rather rapidly realized that she couldn't stand me. And of course, when people get nervous, they become more of who they are. So I became more flamboyant and more theoretical. And of course, she got worse and worse. And this following morning, I was correct. She did not like me. And but the bottom line is, I was in the cab going to the airport, and I said, Helen, you knew that she was like this. You knew that she needs the concrete, the literal, the details. I should have poured academic data on her, and she would have respected me. And at that moment, I began to realize, you gotta talk to people where they live, not where you live. They're very good with numbers, creativity, they're very good with logistics. That's who you want to plan your vacation to Europe. They'll get all the details right. They have more close friends, the importance of being belonging. They tend to respect authority, follow the rules. They tend to be more religious, conventional standard religion rather than being spiritual. And they're really interested in loyalty. Every time I do the math on this, I see the same thing. One of the questions in the 56 questions is something like, I'm not quite sure if I remember it, but would you rather have loyal friends or interesting friends? Now, we all want loyal friends, and we all want interesting friends. But this type cannot tolerate unloyal friends, and the other three types cannot tolerate uninteresting friends. It's a mathematical divide that is somehow evolved in the brain. On the downside, they can be closed-minded, controlling, rigid, stubborn, and moralistic. Now, not everybody's going to be that way. We all had a childhood. We've all learned all kinds of ways to cope with reality. But these are traits that are linked with the serotonin system. Top word they use is family, honesty, care, morals, respect, loyal, trust, and trustworthy. Twice of that one, and values. That's very important to this kind of person. I think Meg Whitman is a perfect example. I've really gotten interested in reading biographies of business people and of leaders, et cetera. And she used that word values more than 50 times in the first 25 pages of her book, which really sort of told me who she was. Even the subtitle of the book was about values. And frugal, they tend to be frugal. Mitt Romney is another good example. He's also very high testosterone. Testosterone builds the face. Testosterone in the womb builds the face. And so the very high forehead, the very heavy brow ridge, the high cheekbones, and the very square jaw is all built by testosterone. But there's a great deal of serotonin in him. I've read his book. I've followed him very carefully in the airwaves, and he is orderly, really likes schedules, respects authority, follows the rules. You would have to, to be part of the Mormon religion, you would really have to be a person who likes the orderly and respects authority. And of course, this sense of duty that the high serotonin type feels is very important. Hu Jintao, the former president of China, once again reserved, modest, consensus building, cautious, orderly, frugal. And this apparently, the 8 honors and 8 shames, is a little sign of it that they have in every grocery store in all of China, giving the moral code of being selfless and moral. So very high on the serotonin level. As a matter of fact, there's a gene in the serotonin system linked with social norm conformity, and that gene is most common in China and Japan. So we're beginning to match, whole personality styles, whole country styles with genetics. Probably a lot of you have been in China or Japan, but I was in Japan some time ago, and I was in a train station, and there were about 40 boys about age 7 in this train station, in a line. Can you imagine 40 boys in a line anywhere in New York City at age 7? And not going to happen. And I think it is in part genetic. It's also upbringing, of course. So Colin Powell, I think, is a very good example. It was a value-based house. When you're leading, you can't become paralyzed by complexity. These people see things very clearly their way and don't, venture out of those boundaries very often. And George Washington, I think, was a perfect example. If you read anything about his life, he was almost the perfect high serotonin type. And he showed up in American history at just the right time. And at some point, I hope to write a book and take a look at history through this sort of this biological perspective. These people are also attracted to people like themselves, in love certainly, probably in business and among their friends also. Just like the high dopamine explorer type, similarity attracts, and the same way among the high serotonin type, similarity attracts. What to do? Keep it concrete, man. Absolutely. Proven principles, established practice, be orderly and calm. These people can be really calm. Details, details. Stick to schedule and plans. Emphasize the right way of doing something. Accentuate tradition. Show respect. Minimize risks. And talk about people and connections. These people are very good at, they're very socially skilled, really. And really find it very important to have good friends. If you take a Prozac or Paxil or one of these drugs that bumps up the serotonin system, you will have, you end up having more friends. It seems to be part of that. Do not present an unsubstantiated point of view. They just can't do that. They don't like theories and speculations if they're unfounded. Skip things like, well, I guess it would be such a, oh, I feel like it, well, I suspect it would be. No, no, no. Keep it concrete. Do not like exaggeration. Don't push for decisions, but giving them time to think about it. Don't leave issues unresolved. Let's say you're having some sort of meeting and you're trying to figure out something and you don't get it figured out in the amount of time. So then you end up saying, you should say something to them like, well, we didn't figure it today, but tomorrow we're going to meet again. We're going to get this done in the first half hour. Then we're going to move on to such and such. In other words, give them a structure, you know, for how things are going to be. And you know you're in trouble when they ask too many questions about the details or they withdraw. I think the kind of person, the authoritative leader, stabilizers, concrete, calm, cautious, prudent, meticulous. They like rules and schedules and routines. They like to enforce the standards. Quality control is really valuable at that, and they are loyal and dependable, but they will resist change. I don't know that much about, you know, I've got some really good historians in the room, but it is my guess that right after World War II, what's the president? Begins with an E. Eisenhower. My guess is that he is probably very much of this builder type, who probably came around at just the right time. I don't know that much about him, but I'm good friends with a really good historian in New York, and he seemed to think that was a president who led in that way. The third of the four broad styles of thinking and behaving are linked with the testosterone system. I call them the director. They shoot for the stars. They're analytical, logical. They understand rule-based systems, things like math, engineering, computers, music. Music is very structural. It's not structural to me. I'm high dopamine. I swing to the beat. I can't see the structure. But they see the structure of it. They'll even see something funny in it. I can't see anything funny in it. I mean, I really love music, but I don't see the sense of humor. They can see it because there's juxtapositions of spatial things that they get and I don't get. They're very experimental, detailed, daring, exacting. They're very rank-oriented. In fact, if you inject testosterone into a dove or even a lizard or a monkey, they will begin to fight for rank. And in fact, middle-aged women, as estrogen levels go down, and so testosterone is unmasked, women will begin to be much more rank-oriented. And in fact, it's called dominance matching. And I got my lesson one night in New York City. It was a black tie event, and I was standing there with four men. And one of them was from the Wall Street Journal. And he was taking Helen Fisher to the cleaners. And there's two basic postural messages in the animal community, all through animals. It's looking little and looking big. and it's called crouch and loom. And even lobsters will walk on their walking legs to impress. Codfish will bulge out their eyes and their pectoral muscles, pectoral fins, etc. They're two basic postural measures. So anyway, I was standing there, and he was really taking me out, and I got smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally, I turned around to him, and I said something vicious. I don't remember what it was, but it was also funny. And at the time, I said, "Oh, God, what'd you do that for?" And all of us went like this. It's called the bared tooth display. Even chimpanzees do it. We do it when we're nervous. And I thought, oh, God, if he acts like a woman, he'll never forgive me. If he acts like a man, he might, this kind of man, he might respect me. And there was this long pause, and finally he threw his hands up. He said, "Helen," he started to laugh. That allowed the rest of them to laugh, and that man has respected me absolutely ever since. And so, you know, it's sort of, they expect you to attack back, and it's called dominance matching, and it's linked with the testosterone system. They're emotionally contained. I've got a girlfriend who, some time ago, she said to her husband, she said, "Sweetie, you haven't told me that you loved me in a month." And he said, "Well, I said that last month and nothing's changed." So they are contained. They're also decisive, bold, tough-minded, and they get to the point. These are the ones that scream, "Get to the point." And indeed, they mean it. On the downside, they tend to be, well, it's not moving, uncompromising, excuse me, impatient, demanding. Mind blindness is an academic term for not really getting into other people's heads and understanding where they're coming from. And I've often thought that might be this mind blindness that this high testosterone type expresses may be why we evolved crying tears. All kinds of animals cry, but they don't cry tears. And my thing is, in early human evolution, maybe females began to, they cry tears more than men do, just so that he gets it. They're gonna cry tears. So I think that that may be linked. They tend to be less empathetic, particularly young men. And it's very interesting, we live in a culture where empathy is all. But when you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, you know, for millions of years, we lived in these little hunting and gathering groups. And, you know, as a man is, you know, catches a baby gazelle, he can't be weeping as he slits the throat of the baby gazelle, or as they raid an enemy camp, etc. I mean, lack of empathy has been a very evolutionary, I'm not suggesting it, but it seems to, it's an evolutionary tactic. And it's very interesting. I recently had a friend whose 15-year-old son was going to a psychiatrist because of problems with the mother. And they said, well, they should put him on some pills or something because he's not empathetic enough. And I said, he's 15. Testosterone is, you know, up into his head like nothing. You know, don't medicate a boy for being less empathetic at this age. And as a matter of fact, as you get older, men get more and more empathetic. As levels of testosterone go down, older men become more and more empathetic because you're seeing more estrogen in them. And last but not least, they do not suffer fools gladly. They have fewer friends, and they have deep friendships, but they're not yakety-yakking with everybody around the barn. So this is they. The top word they use is intelligence. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence, but Americans tend to regard intelligence as a deep understanding of one topic, and that's what they're good at. Debate, geek, nerd, ambition, driven, politics, challenge, and real. They are the least likely of the four broad styles, in fact, to be religious. Steve Jobs is a perfect example. You can see once again the high forehead, the heavy brow ridges, the high cheekbones, and the very square jaw. Brash, prickly, demanding, brutally honest. They really are interested in honesty, perfection, exacting, etc. Margaret Thatcher, they call her the Iron Lady. That's got to mean something. Hillary Clinton wanted to be part of the U.S. Marines. When asked why she was attracted to Bill, she said he wasn't afraid of me. Now, I don't think I'd be saying that. Wouldn't come out of my mouth, but that's her. I think she's a very high testosterone woman. Patton, well, we all know about him. The lions in their dens tremble at his approach, extremely aggressive. Jack Welch is a very interesting one. I think he's very much of the director type, but I think he's also, we're all a combination of all four of these. And I could be, if I was skilled enough and knew these people enough, tell you about where I think they fall on all four scales. But I do think that he is very much of a director builder, high testosterone and serotonin, as opposed to somebody like that guy who's the head of Oracle. Do you remember his name? Larry, yeah. And he is probably the director explorer. So it's a combination of who you are is going to make a very big difference. These people in love go for their opposite. High testosterone goes for high estrogen, and high estrogen goes for high testosterone. They don't understand each other, but they do fall in love and make very good marriages. Be direct. Get to the point. I have a boss, I used to have a boss at Rutgers named Jack. You walk into Jack's office, you sit down and get to the point. Because if you don't, he's out of there. Logical, unemotional. They regard emotion as vulnerability. Avoid sustained eye contact. In fact, when I'm with one of these people, and instead of talking to them directly in front of me, I turn to the side so I'm sitting next to them, and I often don't look at them at all. I could probably rearrange my clothes. They're not looking at me either. In fact, I used to go out with a wonderful man, but he had his eyes shut while we talked. I used to fantasize about rearranging the living room while he was talking to me. He would never notice. Get the big picture first, then the details. Ask what they think, not how they feel. Attack, disagree, and debate. They don't really respect you if you're just a milquetoast. Fairness is in the testosterone system. I find that very interesting. But fairness is structural. And so perhaps that's why. Ask for what you want, because they ain't going to get it unless you do. Don't be subtle about it. Subtlety is not their forte. And give orders very clearly to them. On the downside, don't be self-deprecating, because they're going to believe you. Women are always, we're always leveling the playing field, saying, oh, I'm really not so much of this, and I'm not. Well, we don't really believe that. We're just leveling the playing field. They will believe you. Don't apologize, not moralistic. Don't fill in their silences. That's something I really had to learn, because you can tell I talk fast, but if you keep your mouth shut, they'll get it out at some point. They're not as linguistically skilled, and of course, they often say something that you hadn't expected. So never be long-winded. Link theories with facts, and you're in trouble when they express their rank or become dictatorial and aggressive. I think they are the commanding leader, Patton being a perfect example, really good at technical stuff. Bold, decisive, blunt, concise, skeptical, spatially skilled. They're systems thinker, but they're not necessarily going to be aware of your feelings. You gotta cry for them to see it. The fourth broad style of thinking and behaving, Plato called them the philosopher king. I like that. They see the big picture. I made up a term, web thinking. I know the female estrogen builds more context between the two sides, the two hemispheres of the brain, and more context between the back of the brain and the front of the brain. And I think it allows the high estrogen type, which is largely women. I've studied it in 6 countries, of very different varieties of countries too. These people are contextual, holistic, and they think long term. This is one of the great things that I think that women bring to the modern job market. They're imaginative, mentally flexible, really good with ambiguity. Probably that's great. If you've got small children, you've got to deal with all kinds of things that don't seem to work together. They're very good. It's called executive social skills, linguistics. They're very good with language. Studies in over 20 countries of this. High estrogen people, largely women, are better on average, at reading posture, gesture, faces, and tone of voice. They're intuitive. The academic term now is theory of mind, the ability to climb into somebody's head and figure out what they're saying. And of course, you're going to be pretty good at it if you can read them And you can think contextually, so you can see where these things begin to go together as a constellation of personality traits working together. They tend to be empathetic, nurturing, and trusting. I really like that one, the trusting. You know, anthropologists have never really known why people trust. You know, I mean, if you trust the wrong person, you're really up the creek. But if you trust the right person, as it turns out, you save a lot of metabolic energy. And you can see why they could trust the right person. Because if you can read who they are, figure out what they're thinking, and put them in a whole context, you can figure out who to trust. And so this, I love the fact that this constellation in all four cases is very, you can see where they go together. They're introspective. Everything has meaning. Just the way he cuts the lemon for the drinks knows you're not going to make love tonight, you know, or whatever. Everything has meaning. They live in a world of win-win. They're very emotionally expressive, and they have what I call diplomatic intelligence. On the downside, they can be scattered, because they're thinking of a million things. They've got a million things going on up there. Indecisive. You know, well, where do you want to go for dinner? Oh, we could go here, we could go there, we could make up your mind. I am making up my mind. We could go here, we could go there, we could go. And of course, my twin sister and I are just like that. We can be sitting down and having almost ordered in a restaurant, and she'll say to me, "You think we really should be here, or maybe someplace else?" It would drive men crazy. Placating, they want to please, they want to level the playing field. Ruminating, they can think over and over and over about what somebody said, what somebody did 50 years ago. In fact, they can be gullible because they are so trusting. Hypersensitive, this is the biggest problem with women in business. You know, after a big battle in the office, you know, the men go all out for a beer. The women go home and sulk for 3 weeks because the intricacies of all of this. They're more backstabbing. They don't hit you in the face, but they'll get you anyhow, one way or another. And they're unforgiving. There's a lot of estrogen receptors in the hippocampus, the brain region, the primary brain region for memory. And even among chimpanzees, females have a better memory for good reasons. I mean, there was a thing with a female chimpanzee had a new baby, and another female stole the baby. Well, she got the baby back, but for the next 40 years, she didn't talk to that other, didn't interact with that other female. Women remember. And it's a bit of a blight. They remember what you didn't do 5 summers ago, what you should have done 10 years ago at Christmas time. Instead of they remember. And of course, it comes from millions of years of raising tiny, helpless babies through a very, very long period. You gotta remember who your friends are, who your enemies are, and how to behave around people. And they can be effusive. Top word is passion, real heart, kindness, sensitivity. They're the big readers of the world. Middle-aged women are the biggest readers in America, and I think around the world. Sweet, learning, random. This type can do with random. High testosterone or high serotonin doesn't do random. I got to figure it out. It's got to have a pattern, etc. They can do random, and of course, empathetic. Oprah Winfrey is a perfect example. The only time I have made a bad decision is when I didn't follow my instinct. No high testosterone person would do that. They'd never say that. Instinct? What do you mean? I got to have the facts, Bill Clinton, the whole world knows he can't stop talking. Real people skills. I read his book. I think it's some 963 pages. But he says in it, I think it's important to have a synthesizing mind. Feels everybody's pain. In fact, we're always wondering when we're going to have our first female president. I think we've had our first female president. And if we get his wife, I don't think she's going to be the first female president. Abraham Lincoln is a very interesting guy, self-deprecating, really contextual, so many sides to an issue. Very intuitive. He would persuade rather than coerce, And Lincoln's genius was his ability to work with colleagues, to draw upon their talents, et cetera, et cetera. I think that in the womb, there was a lot of testosterone in that guy. I think that Obama has a lot of that too. What's interesting to me is things like the Oval Office rug has inspirational quotes on it. Well, I don't think George Bush would do that. And certainly somebody like Patton wouldn't do it. So I think he sees the big picture, et cetera. I think I read a lot about him. I think his wife is the opposite. I think she's the high testosterone type. You know, he calls her the boss. And I think she does run the show in that family, you know, inside the White House. But Charles Darwin, I think, was the finest high estrogen person. He connected every living thing. Certainly very much of an explorer, but also a very kind and very empathetic guy with a contextual view of the world and everything in it had never really been seen before. Think contextually and long-term with them. Give theories and ancillary data. They can deal with it. Balance your facts with your emotions. You know, find points of agreement early in the conversation. Appreciate their contributions. Talk about people. They like that. Sit facing them. You know, and do that anchoring gaze. And reveal your feelings because you know, that helps you bond with them. Do not compete with them. Do not be blunt or aggressive. Do not be impersonal. Do not interrupt. Some nice data on high estrogen. You know what two high estrogen people will do is, I'll talk, I finish, she talks, she finishes, I talk, I finish. We have a way, we know what we're doing. And when people barge in and interrupt, it's not the style of conversation that this high estrogen type uses. They seek meaning in everything, and you're in trouble when they placate or are reluctant. I think that is what I would call the diplomatic leader, imaginative. They think long term, they weigh all the options, they tend to be flexible. They read people's motives, listens to others' views. They want consensus, certainly Lincoln did. I do think that Obama does, and Obama's indecisive. And I think that it's not indecisive. I think it's a person who's highly expressive of the estrogen system in the brain. I mean, for example, he and Putin would never get each other. Putin is all testosterone, you know, so he doesn't get the nuance of Obama, and of course Obama probably thinks he's a bear. I mean, I am not for Trump, but Trump and Putin would understand each other. I don't know if either would walk out alive, but they would get it. So they develop they're going to be very good at making teams, seeking consensus, being insightful, and motivating people. One of the issues is they will ruminate and be indecisive. So this is my little summary of the four broad styles of thinking and behaving. Don't forget that we are all a combination of all of them, but we do have personalities. And although they can change to some degree, we are who we are. As I've got all these zip codes of everybody in the United States and everywhere else in the world, a lot of places, this is where the high serotonin, traditional, conventional, follow the rules, respects authority, live. Midwest and South. All around Washington, D.C., a high testosterone is trying to run the world. Or they're out gambling in Nevada, which is very spatial. Or they're shooting the animals in Alaska, another special task. Everything that's loose rolls into California, the high dopamine type. And of course, the high estrogen type, where it's a great many Democrats. And also, most of the colleges and universities apparently are in the Northeast and the Northwest, linked with high estrogen. So this is the most important slide for me. I'm not going to bore you with it much, but bottom line is this questionnaire that I made, and I do know I'm bragging, is the first in the world to start from brain circuitry to build a questionnaire, and then go back to brain circuitry to prove it. And so what I did is I had 2 groups of people take the questionnaire, and then we put them into the brain scanner, and we're able to prove that if you really score high on the testosterone scale, for example, on my questionnaire, you also show more activity in brain regions built by testosterone, etc. So that study was published about a year ago, and I have 3 studies now to prove that this questionnaire is actually measuring what it says it's measuring. So I think these evolved a long time ago. For millions of years, we lived in these little hunting and gathering groups. Anthropologists think that there was about 25 individuals in the group. About 10 or 12 were children and adolescents. That leaves about 10 or 12 who are grown-ups. And let's say they're all going over the hill. And they get all over the hill and they see a pile of mushrooms. You can't have all of the explorer high dopamine types say, let's try the mushrooms. You gotta have some of the builder type, traditional type say, oh, it's not in our tradition to try these mushrooms. You gotta have some high testosterone types who are very experimental and say, well, let's feed the mushrooms to the dog and see what happens. And you gotta have some high estrogen kind of people who say, let's sit down and pool our data on these mushrooms here. And so I do think that these types evolve together, and that really once you understand them, you could build a different type of corporate board, deal with your colleagues differently, deal with, as a matter of fact, I actually don't know if this is controversial, but I was saying at lunch that the White House called me once about 6 months ago. And what they want to do is they put me on to a child psychiatrist, and they want to match foster children with foster parents. So I think there's many uses of it. So I get off the phone after 2 hours on this thing, and I look at the phone, and then she calls back. She wanted to ask one more question. My first question to her was, tell me, are you from the White House or a White House? So anyway, I think that there's many ways to use this data. So I built, I'm building now, I've finished building a company called Neurocolor, in which we're going to go into various businesses and begin to use this data to not only improve what I would call personal relationships, but also business relationships and a new understanding of leadership. So I will end with 2 things. One is a story of something that happened in, and we're beginning to break down these personality styles into smaller and smaller units. For example, my partner in this thing is not an empathetic guy. He's pleased to say that. But he is contextual. So I'm beginning to break down mathematically each of these 4 broad styles of thinking and behaving into subsystems, and eventually I hope to break it down to really show how each person behaves in very particular ways under all kinds of circumstances. So I'm working on that. But anyway, so I want to finish up with these, a story and then my final point. The story I was taken with Match.com to Japan, because they were starting Match.com in Japan. And I was supposed to be there for a week, and it just explained to the press what it's all about the 4 personality types, et cetera, et cetera. So I did all that. And then the final night came, and I was talking to my wonderful little handler, and I said, so what am I supposed to do tonight? She said, well, Helen, we're going to have a little mixer. It's a little icebreaker thing. And what you're going to do, what you're going to do is, so this was I arrived at this place, and it looked like the White House. And there were mannequins with wedding dresses and 6-foot-high flower arrangements and a big ballroom. And I said, okay, what am I supposed to do? And she said, well, everybody's taken your questionnaire. There was about 300 of the first 300 people who are now on JapanMatch.com. Everybody's taken their questionnaire, and each one of them is wearing a wristband. Those who are the highest on the dopamine scale, the explorer, will be wearing a yellow one. energy, light. Those who are more expressive of the serotonin system, the traditional, will be wearing royal blue. Those who are most expressive of testosterone were wearing what I call power tie red. And the high estrogen type were wearing green, what I call tree hugger green. So anyway, they were all wearing these things, and then the moment was going to come and for this icebreaker. And what they did is they wheeled out 4 bases of a wedding cake. Each piece of the wedding cake was about 2 feet by 2 feet. And the 4 broad types were supposed to go to different parts of this ballroom and decorate that wedding cake, just the bottom layer of it. And I was supposed to then go around and talk to the press. There must have been 100 people from the press, at least 300 people, et cetera, et cetera. And I was supposed to rate, or something, these 4 cakes. So I thought to myself, oh my God, this is the nadir of my scientific career here. I don't know from wedding cakes. So anyway, it was a giant number of people, a lot of din. I couldn't see how they were decorated. And then, so the first thing came, and the crowd parted, and I went and I saw the first wedding cake. And it was decorated by the people of the high estrogen type. And this is what I saw. That cake was smiling at me. It was saying, let's be friends. They write love on it. It was very intimate, very personal, very, please like me, let's get connected. So I said, all right, well, 1 for 1, I got that one down. So then I go off to the builder cake, the traditional kind of human being. And I walk in the crowd parts, and this is what I see. That's very formal. It's probably who you want to decorate your wedding. It's formal. It's nowhere near as personal and friendly, but it's a formal, traditional, more kind of wedding cake. 1 kiwi, 1 cherry, 1 kiwi, 1 cherry, kiwi. It's an orderly cake. So then I go over to the high testosterone cake, and the crowd parts, and I look at it, and this is what I see. There is no emotion in that cake. 0 emotion in that cake. But they thought outside the box and decorated around the cake. Incredible. So then I go over to the last cake, which is the high dopamine cake. The creative, curious, energetic, spontaneous, irreverent type. And the crowd parts. And the first thing I see is 3 young men pitching fruit at the cake. And then one of them looks up at me from the other side, and taking one look at me, there were some flowers in a vase that had nothing to do with the decorations. And he takes them dripping out of their vase and plunges it in the middle of the cake. And this is what you see here. So I really end with this. We're taught the golden rule, to do unto others as we would have done unto ourselves. I don't believe it. I think instead, I believe in the platinum rule, which is to do unto others as they want to be treated, and you will reach them and win. Thank you. So, time for questions? Or?
There are microphones here in the front, as you wish, or speak up from your seat as you like.
Hello. Given Pope Francis's recent trip to the United States, might you be able to comment on his leadership style, and could his style account for his popularity with the left?
With the left? Okay. Well, I certainly watched a lot of that. It actually moved me to tears. I would actually think that somebody who's that religious and has devoted his life to it would be a high serotonin type. Actually, the high serotonin type is less sexual. This is why when people take Prozac or Paxil, they often have difficulty with their sexuality. And somebody who's going to go into the clergy, the Catholic clergy, is probably going to be the kind of person who's less interested in sex. And of course, he's probably high serotonin builder type and high estrogen, because of the tremendous compassion for every living person. And why the left like them is there's many more people on the left who are high estrogen. Many more people on the right are high serotonin. So I think that there is biology to that, and that the left might, be more, find him more appealing. But I think a lot of the right found him appealing too. Yeah, I do. Don't you? Yeah, he was very appealing to everybody. Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Just fine, thank you.
I was wondering how you feel feminists or those
How I feel what?
How you feel that feminists respond to your work, or those who want to elevate women into more positions of leadership, especially as you're kind of talking about how there may be some inherent differences in different sexes' approach to leadership, at least statistically. I was wondering how you would use that to promote women in leadership, or if you think that supports that.
Okay, so the question is, what about women in leadership, and how do I feel about that? I wrote a book, it took me about 7 years to write the book, called The First Sex, The Natural Talents of Women and How They're Changing the World. And if I had to sum up my feeling about women in business, I would sum it up in one sentence. Men and women are like 2 feet. They need each other to get ahead. But they are not alike. They bring to the workforce some really different skills, and I think we need both of them. And in fact, if I really was pressed, I would say that in this modern age, we might need a lot of women's skills even more. I will say also that I'm a very big proponent for men. We've spent 50 years trying to understand women. And I think we've busted a lot of myths about them, and I hope I've contributed to that. But I think it's time to actually understand men, too. So you didn't ask this, but I'll just to say that on my hobby horse that men tend to be more romantic than women. They fall in love more often. When they do find a woman they really like, they want to introduce them to friends and family sooner. They want to move in sooner. All this data comes from the biggest study in America of singles that I do with Match.com annually. Men have more intimate conversations with their wives than women do with their husbands, because women have their intimate conversations with their girlfriends. And men are 2.5 times more likely to kill themselves when a relationship is over. But that's in the love world. In the world of business and politics, we need women. We need that other perspective. But don't forget that all women don't think like women. There's all kinds of, and particularly as women get older, as levels of estrogen go down, unmasking levels of testosterone, you get somebody like Hillary Clinton, who I think is quite warlike, and Margaret Thatcher, etc. So not all women are alike, but on average, the world needs women's verbal skills, their people skills, their negotiating skills, their imagination, and their empathy. Somebody else. Yes.
This is on. I'll take a stab at this. One of the things that's noticeable about the current presidential primary season is that there seem to be a lot of different styles among the various candidates, both Republican and Democrat. And I studied political science as an academic career, so I wonder, given the parameters of the office of President of the United States, would you be in a position to suggest some of the a personality type that would be best suited for this? Because it does require some decisiveness, but it also requires some negotiation, right, and some empathy, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I'll just do my best, but a lot of other people in the room could do it too. So, I wrote a piece for Newsweek about the differences between Romney and Obama, and I really studied those personalities. And Match.com actually wants me, a few weeks ago, they wanted me to really study on all of these people. And I said, I can't do that. There's just too many people. I can't read all their books and follow all this stuff. I need to know more about them. So we're waiting, and I'm waiting until we really get a candidate on each side. And then I will pour myself into the literature about them, and to try and really figure out who they are. And it's so interesting when you read the New York Times. Most people are reading and listening about, well, what is their attitude toward China? How are they going to manage the international trade? I'm reading for the tiny little details of, for example, Romney's chauffeur said he was so orderly, had to have a schedule. So it's all these little details that end up telling you who somebody is. So I will end up studying I bought Hillary's big book, and I'll straggle through that. But I already think I know pretty much who she is. I'll be interested to know whether she's good at math or what kind of music she likes. And somebody like Bernie Sanders is probably going to be a more complex personality, more nuanced, and perhaps more of the negotiator. I haven't studied him enough to know, but I will be glued to the tube on Tuesday night, watching not just what their policies are, but how they present themselves, how they use their words, what words they choose to speak, to employ, and of course, we all know who Donald Trump is. I don't think he's got anything but testosterone in him, and so, Bush is much more complex, I think. I think really does have a lot of the estrogen in him. But anyway, I need to study them. But I would never presume to suggest who would be better in this environment, because there's so many parts to this environment. And of course, what we would all like is somebody, I would guess, is somebody who's well-rounded, who can do it all, who's very good at negotiating, but can put their foot down. Who's very balanced in all four of them in various nuanced ways, so that they can, and there are people like that, but they don't end up, they often don't end up running for office because a lot of people want it simple, and so they don't get very far because the real issues in the world are not simple, and they're very contextual, and sometimes it is simple, but the bottom line is, I think we're going to, the person might not win in this political world, but I would say the tremendous advantage of somebody who has some of the skills in all four of these broad styles. Yeah. Somebody else.
Question about you sort of tease us with the fourth factor of oxytocin.
Yes. Yeah, I actually call it the estrogen oxytocin system. I simplify it for a speech, but oxytocin is on the way to making estrogen, so they're all in the same chemical pathway, or it's the reverse. I can't quite remember at the moment. Do you know? But anyway, oxytocin is also, and in my academic papers I write about it, it's also linked with being trusting, being empathetic, and another thing. But they're in the same biological category. So I probably should have said estrogen, oxytocin. I always do in my academic articles, but that's a very good point. That oxytocin is in that system and part of I think the estrogen complex of personality traits. Yeah.
Hello. I'm kind of interested in taking your test. Is there a way to sign up? Do I have to go through Match.com or Neurocolor?
Great. Number one, I would not advise going through Match.com because you will get a lot of literature continually, and it'll, unless you're looking for somebody that way, I would not do that. We just put it on one of my websites called www.theanatomyoflove. So you can get it there. You can also get it by buying my book. It's $6, and because it's in paperback now. And the book is called Why Him, Why Her. So you got to remember either The Anatomy of Love or the book Why Him, Why Her. And you can get it, and it'll explain how to. I have evolved since then. As I mentioned in that book, and both of them, I talk largely about what you are. But it's very interesting to know also what you're not. Now, for example, I am very low on serotonin. I was behind the door when they were passing that one out. I don't follow the rules. I don't respect authority unless it makes sense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's valuable to know who you are not. And to even surround yourself with some people who are that way so that you get some of the benefits of them. But I wouldn't marry one if you're high explorer type. I think the day might come when you get a little tired of it.
And if you'll permit me, Hillary Clinton likes whatever the focus group tells her to like.
She likes what?
Whatever the focus group tells her to like.
Huh. What's that last word?
It's a joke.
Oh, sorry.
How do you think the coevolution of genetics and personalities is going to change personalities of people in the future? Do you think testosterone and estrogen might become more balanced out, whereas serotonin and dopamine might become even more intensified?
You know, it's amazing the way people take drugs. And drugs can change personalities. For example, people who are taking Prozac, Paxil, whatever, you know, will change part of their personality. You know, sex drive will be less, sexual performance will be less, they'll tend to make more friends, they'll be calmer, they will blunt their emotions, etc. And of course, this is what you want to do if you're going through a terrible crisis in life, or whether you are born in ways with there's fewer receptor sites or fewer production of the chemical, etc. So there's no question about it that these drugs can, you know, affect personality. And in fact, some people have said to me, well, what happens if I fall in love with somebody while I'm on one of these drugs? And I said, stay on the drugs. So but we're already really tampering. I mean, you can shoot up testosterone and be more aggressive. Middle-aged women take a lot of estrogen. But, you know, personality, when we study personality, there's something called test-retest. So you'll give somebody a personality questionnaire, and then 6 months later you do it again, and 6 years later, and they have found that you really do, unless you're taking drugs or altering it in some other way, you really do remain, about 86% of the time you will answer the question the same way. So we can act out of character, but it's tiring. And you know, for example, I was telling this at lunch, you know, I work with various business groups, and with Visa, for example, I did a thing with Visa, and there was a lot of women in the boardroom, I don't know, about 20 of them, and they all took my personality questionnaire, and I got to know them during the course of the day. And there was one woman who scored very high on my dopamine scale on the questionnaire, but she was counting thing, which was very structured, very processed, and I didn't want to say anything to her in front of everybody else in the group. I mean, I didn't want to screw up anything for her business life, but I took her aside at one point and I said, you know, your questionnaire shows that you're a risk taker, novelty seeker, curious, creative, and you have a job that is very different from that. Do you get tired from work? And she said, I'm always exhausted. So we can act out of character. And also you can change to some extent. For example, I had a woman who was very high on the explorer scale, high dopamine type, risk-taking. Then she had 2 small children, very small children. And suddenly she changed. Suddenly she wanted structure and process and familiarity and everything. But as I said to her, when these children grow up, you will go back to being who you really are. But that actually wasn't your question. Your question is, will this change over time? It can change in one of 2 ways. Selection. For example, China and Japan have selected for a gene in the serotonin system linked with social norm conformity, and you can see it in their governments. I don't know, there's a gene in the dopamine system linked with risk-taking and novelty-seeking. And can anybody guess where that gene is most prevalent in the world? Think of the biggest migration you've ever seen. You would think the USA, but it's up the Amazon River. These people, either the ones that weren't like that died out along the way, or they got to the Amazon and those that couldn't deal with risk died out. But whatever it is these little tribes up the Amazon River are very high with that gene for risk-taking in the dopamine system. So by selection it can change. But you know, we already are altering our personalities all the time. In fact, when I was studying this recently, before I put people in brain scanners to match the questionnaire with the hormones and neurotransmitters, I decided the first thing I would do is go to a college population and just take saliva, blood, and urine and see if I could simply do it. It took me 4 years to find 211 sober kids in a college. 4 years. I gave up. So as everybody's altering, you know, who they are in various, I can even see on Match.com, you know, 10 years from now, instead of saying, well, I like to ride my bicycle and I like this and that, you know, you could say instead, you know, my name is whatever. I'm high on the dopamine scale. I'm pretty low on serotonin. In other words, just even give a biological readout of who they are. So, I mean, we are in a drug culture. Over 100 million people take some kind of antidepressant. I write about this all the time. I'm opposed to them, except for people who really need it. But I do think we're going down the road to really extremely subtle abilities to change personality, and that human beings will do that more and more. Somebody else? Yeah.
How confident would you feel in developing a profile based upon the written words of an individual, especially a presidential candidate? That candidate wrote everything him or herself.
Yeah.
Not filtered. You didn't ask the driver.
I do that because I read autobiographies. I already do that. Now, confident, I'm never confident. I'm a scientist, and, you know, I don't know whether, you know, I never know whether I've got it right. It's very new material. So, as a matter of fact, when I first stumbled on these 4 broad styles of thinking and behaving, I went over to Rockefeller University to talk to a friend of mine. This guy's going to win a Nobel Prize someday. And I said, listen, Don, I found what looks like 4 biological styles of thinking and behaving. Do you mind if I come over and review the literature to you and just see what you think about it? So I go over and I spread out all my papers and I do the whole thing for an hour. And I say, look, you see these patterns in nature and all that stuff. I said, Don, what do you think? And he said, I'm a director. So he didn't even listen to what I said. It's as if we naturally, you know, we respond in that way. So I'm just beginning. It's a pioneering thing. So far, so good. And we'll see what happens. Somebody over there got up and, oh, that's you. Good.
I know that emailed you, Marianne. How's it going?
Oh, how
Glad you're
wonderful.
here.
Oh, wow, nice to see you. We talked by email.
Yes, thank you
Yeah.
for answering it. Anyway, I had a quick question regarding all of the surveys you've compiled.
Lean into the mic.
How frequent would you say that people confabulate when they're doing the surveys? And do you have a way of tracking that? Because sometimes I wonder when someone's filling out a survey, do they fill it out as they really are, or how they want to be, or they want to be perceived?
Exactly. Well, you know, in the making of questionnaires, that's, did I say that to you, or because you, in my email? No. Well, anyway, well, you got it right. Bottom line is, you know, there are 3 ways you can answer any questionnaire. With who you really are, with who you want to be, and with who you want, or with whoever you want others to think you are. And there's absolutely really no way to do that. I really studied how you make a questionnaire and how you ask the questions to be as, you know, avoidant of that as possible. And of course, it's on a dating site. I mean, you're not gonna, but the bottom line is when you're working with 14 million of them, you know, you begin to see, or even 30,000 every couple of weeks, you begin to see patterns. And I'm assuming that those patterns are real. Yeah. So.
Take one more?
Sure, great.
Go ahead.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
You had mentioned that you have an interest in what kind of music Hillary Clinton listens to. Have you done any studies on like music genres that correlate with the different personalities, and is that like why people are attracted to similar music tastes?
Very interesting. No, I haven't. There's the question is, have I ever looked at different kinds of music, different genres of music, and correlated it with personality type, that certain types of people are going to go for certain kinds of music. There is data that the high dopamine type likes more avant-garde music and more avant-garde art. And I did do a study of doodles. And very differently, the 4 types, 4 broad styles of thinking and behaving did different kinds of doodles. So I won't be surprised to find that they gravitate to different kinds of music, different kinds of art, even different kinds of literature. Now, there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be people who are different. Because don't forget, your childhood plays a role. Your friends play a role. You might not have naturally liked a certain kind of music, but the cool boy does, and so you will too, that kind of thing. But I would guess that this is going to reverberate in all of your natural tastes. So thank you very much.